Hey folks, welcome back for another episode of Code Club. If you recall, a couple months ago in the fall of 2024, the United States at least was wrecked by a number of major flooding events. Hurricanes that came up through the southeast corner of the United States wreaked just horrible damage. In October, the New York Times, in a newsletter that I receive in my email, had an article called America's Flooding Problem, where they talked about this. And they talked about that there's been a surge in U.S. flood disasters over the past 24 years or so. And they presented this figure, which I thought was really nice and a really elegant way of depicting the surge or the increase in the number of flood disasters as declared by the United States Federal Emergency Management Agency. And so I wanted to generate this figure with you all. Some of the things that I really like about this is that it's simple. New York Times does a really nice job in their data visualizations of really stripping away a lot of the extra stuff in a figure and emphasizing what's really important. And they did this also with their choice of color. So the bar for 2024 is more bold, more pronounced than for the other years. They also strip away the axis titles, right? There's no y-axis title. It's up here on the grid line, right? And similarly, it's clear that these are the years on the x-axis. Also, they make the central point right here in this call out pointing to that bar, that there's been 66 declarations this year so far. So I want to build this plot with you in RStudio using ggplot2. As always, if you want to get the code that I'm developing here in RStudio, you can go down below in the description for this episode. You'll find a link to a blog post where you can get the code that I'm starting with, as well as everything else. This is data that I kind of guesstimated, if you will, from the original figure here, just kind of getting a close approximation to the values. Again, I'm not trying to kind of make any big scientific point or social point about the data. I just want to make a figure that looks like this. And so again, we can go ahead and load the tidyverse as well as our flooding data table. I've gone ahead and written out the ggsave statement to create flooding.png using the same aspect ratio as was found in the original figure. So again, we have flooding. And the first thing to note about the original figure is that it is a bar plot, right? So let's go ahead and start off by creating that initial bar plot. So we'll go ahead and pipe flooding to ggplot, and our aesthetics on the x-axis, we'll put year, and on the y, we'll do declarations, and then do geom call. Geom call generates the bar plot. And we've made a few bar plots in the past. So we'll go ahead and generate this. Here we are with our version of the plot. And as you can see, my guesstimate at trying to kind of figure out the underlying data of the original plot, I think I did a pretty adequate job. All right, so the big thing that I want to focus on in this figure is the color. And so we'll notice that all of the years except for 2024 were this lighter blue, and then 2024 was this darker blue, right? And so I don't exactly know what these colors are, but I have my trusty color meter that I can use. On a Mac, within the Applications Utilities directory, there is a tool called Digital Color Meter. It allows me to put my cursor over anything I want to then see it in the digital color meter at that color. I get the hexadecimal for the red, green, and the blue, so that 0xBA is the amount of red. And the G is 0xD1. The D1 is the green, and the D6 is the amount of blue. I can go ahead and copy that. If I come down here then into my code and paste, I'll get the hexadecimal for the blue. And if I go ahead and put that in quotes, I now see that background kind of light baby blue color. Returning to the original figure, I'll go ahead now and get this darker blue, copy that, and paste that into RStudio, and we get that darker blue. And so what am I going to do with these? Well, I'm not sure. Actually, let's see what we can do. So first of all, I could go ahead and take this baby blue color, and I could put that as an argument into geom call. Now, I am often tempted to do color equals whatever within geom call because it's a color, but that will only get you the surrounding border of each of the columns. What I want is the fill. And so I'll do fill equals that, and I'll go ahead and remove that plus sign. And so let's go ahead and see what it looks like with that blue color. And so now we see that our bars are in fact the same blue color as they had. But we need this 2024 to be the darker blue. So I'm going to create a new column in flooding to indicate whether or not it's the year 2024. And I'll do that within the definition of the tibble. I could do that with the mutate statement as well, but I may as well do it here. And I'll say is 2024 equals, and then it's going to be year equals 2024. And so now if I look at flooding, I see that all those are false. And if I look at the tail on flooding, I should see that 2024 is in fact true, which is great. And so now within ggplot, within the AES, I can then do fill equals is 2024. And I'm going to remove this fill here from geom_call because, well, let me show you what would happen if I don't. Basically, nothing happens, right? Nothing changes because this fill equals this hexadecimal is effectively going to trump, or it's going to overrule what was set here. So we'll go ahead and remove this. And now when we run it, we now see that we get the default colors for ggplot2, where we get this salmon color for all the false values and this teal color for the true values. I want to change that though using scale fill manual. And so now we'll come in here and we'll do scale fill manual. And I'm realizing that I forgot to save the hexadecimal for that baby blue. So I'm going to do Control Z a few times and grab that fill, and I'm going to plop that down here as a holder, and then I'm going to do Command Shift Z to basically redo everything, right? Okay, now we're back here. Now what I can do is breaks, and I can give it a vector, and so the first value is going to be the false, and the second is the true. And so we'll do false and true. That's also the alphabetical order. And then values will be the colors that I want. And so I'm going to, the first one will be that light baby blue color for the non-2024 years. And then the darker blue will be for that true. And so I'm going to go ahead and grab this hexadecimal and delete all that and plop that in here. And then the true value will be this hexadecimal code here. And we'll plop that in there. And that then should modify the breaks and the values. I could also in here do labels. I could also do the name of the scale, but ultimately I'm going to be removing the legend, right? And so what I'll do here in geom_call then would be show.legend equals false. And here we go. We now have our bars in the same color as they had in the original New York Times version. They don't stand out as much against the background because the background I currently have is this theme gray, the default theme. So I'm going to go ahead and change that now. So I'm going to use theme classic as my starting place. And so now what we can see is that we've really cleaned up the background quite a bit. We do have a x-axis line here, and we also have a y-axis line. One of the things that often annoys people about ggplot2 bar plots is that it adds this expansion around the whole perimeter of the plot. And so for a bar plot, I think that does look weird, right? Because these bars are just kind of like sitting in this vertical space. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the expand all the way around. And we can do that using chord Cartesian. And I'll put this here after scale. So we'll do chord Cartesian and we'll do expand equals false. And so now you can see that sure enough, our bars are right on that x-axis line. And they are right up against the y-axis on the left and right up against the limit on the right. Before I do anything more with the theming, I think I'll try to go ahead and add in my title, the caption. And so the title is a surge in US flood disasters. And so back up here, I'll do labs title equals surge in US flood disasters. And then caption, we'll go ahead and copy this in. Paste that in, okay? And then we need a plus sign at the end here. And so now we see we've got our title as well as the caption. Just because the caption looks so obviously wrong, I'm going to fix that. And this will force me to use some theming from ggtext. So we'll do theme, and we'll do plot.caption, element text box, simple. And this will wrap the text for us, as well as allow us to use HTML and CSS down the road. But element text box simple comes to us from ggtext. So I need to add library ggtext, and then let's go ahead and load all this. And so that is looking good. One quick thing I'm noticing though is that the caption and the title in the original is left justified on the plot, whereas mine is on the panel. So the panel is defined by the y-axis. So we can very quickly change that using plot.caption position equals plot, and then plot.title.position equals plot. I know I'm also going to end up using the title, so I'll also do plot.title equals element text. I'll do face equals bold, and get a comma in there. Wonderful. Now let's turn our attention to this really slick annotation that they have in the upper right saying 66 declarations this year so far. There's a few ways we could do that. I think I will use some of the tooling from ggtext. And I'm going to use ggtext because, again, part of the label is bolded and colored, the same as the 2024 bar. And part of it then is the sans serif font that's a black plain face font. And I think I'll use either geom rich text or geom text box. And so let's try geom rich text. If I come down here, I only have one thing to add. So I think I can do annotate, and we'll do geom equals text box. And then for our X, I'm going to put that, so it's going to be right justified, it appears, right? So I'm going to think about my coordinates relative to the right justification. And so that's going to be between 22 and 23, 2022 and 2023. And yeah, so let's do 2022.5. And then our Y, let's make that, it's just going to be above 60. So maybe like 62. And we also are going to need to give it the label. And so label equals, so we'll copy this and paste it in. And so then we know that there's a line break right here, which will indicate with the BR anchor. And so it doesn't like me using that with annotate. So I think what I'll do instead is go ahead and do geom text box. All right, that's a shame that we can't use annotate, but that shouldn't be such a problem. So I think this should work. Let's try it. All right, so it's adding a legend, which is funny. And also we've got this box around it. So let's go ahead and turn off the legend, and we can do show.legend equals false. And then let's try geom rich text instead of text box. So we'll do rich text. And so I don't really see any benefit of rich text over text box. Maybe that will become more apparent as we dig into some of the arguments for getting it to look more like we want it to look. So in here, let's go ahead and do hjust equals 1. And I'm going to go ahead and reflow my code, which I think I can do with Command I. And so that puts our box there, which is great. I'm going to try to see how far I can get in modifying this rich text label before I have to look at the help, okay? So something I don't want is this background being the same color as the true value, right? So for some reason, it's automatically filling it with true, which I find odd, right? And so let's go ahead and do fill equals NA, color equals black. Now let's see about adding the coloring and emphasis for the 66 declarations. And again, we're going to do that by inserting some HTML with CSS. So I'll do a span, and then we'll do style equals, and then in quotes, so single quotes, I will go ahead and do color, colon, and then I will put this hexadecimal in, and then we'll go ahead and back out of that span by putting in a back or / span. And so now we see our 66 declarations. Wonderful. But now we want that to be bolded, right? And so we can go ahead and put, I think 2 stars on either side of 66 declarations. This is mixing Markdown with HTML, which is a little bit wonky, but whatever, that should be fine. Now we see that we have the 66 declarations bolded and with that blue color, and that's looking pretty good. Now we want to get rid of the label around our text. And I'm not really sure how we do that. So now I'm going to cave and look at the help for geom rich text. So scrolling down through here, I'm going to look for the aesthetic section, right? And I see that there's a label color and a label size. I could see changing the label color to be NA. So I think that's what I'll do. Go ahead and copy that and bring that into geom rich text. And we'll set that equal to NA, as I said. That then gets rid of the border around our label. Now what I'd like to do is draw this horizontal line from the text to the bar. All right, so we'll do that with an annotate function that I will put in here after geom rich text. We'll do annotate, and we'll do geom equals segment. And so geom segment requires an x, xend, y, and yend. So we'll do x, xend, y, yend. And so our x is going to be the starting position, right? And so this would be just to the left, which actually is what I have here, 2022.5. And then our xend is where we want it to end, right? And so, you know what? I'm going to make it like 2024, and then I'm going to put this before calling geom call. That'll make it a lot easier than trying to figure out what the proper end position is. So that'll be 2024. And again, I'm going to go ahead and take this and put it before geom call, right? And that way, again, geom call will be put on top of that line segment. So that should be good. And then for y, let's look at this. The top here is at 64. And where did I put the text at? I put it at 62. And so 62 is basically right between the two lines. And so it's probably going to want to be like 62 and a half or 63. I'm going to start with 63 and we'll go from there. So we'll do 63 as well as 63 for y end. There we go. Good. But we want to move it up just a smidge because that's right at the bottom of the line. And so let's put that up to maybe 63.5. The position of that line might need to change as we fiddle with the size of our font. So let's hold off on that for now. So now what we want to do is turn our attention to the axes. And I think the x-axis is going to be a lot easier than the y-axis. So let's do the easy thing first. And that we can achieve within our theme function, right? And so looking at this, we still have in theirs, there are tick marks, and there is also the horizontal line, but they are a pretty light gray. And so let's go ahead and we'll do axis.line.x element line, and we'll do color equals, what does light gray look like? We'll also do axis.ticks.x equals element line, and we'll do color equals light gray. And so now we see that we have our light gray line here at the bottom, looking good. I think it's a little bit thicker than what they have here. And so I'm going to go ahead and change my line width down. We'll do line width to 0.25. And I'll do that for both the axis as well as the ticks. So I think that is a bit more narrow and good. The ticks are a little bit longer in their version than in mine. And so let's go ahead and modify that. We'll do axis.ticks.length, add on the x to it just to keep x and y separate from each other. And that will be unit. And I don't really know what value to use. So I'm going to start with 10 and I'll say it's in points. Okay. And so again, by putting in something like 10, I can easily add or subtract from that value. And so I think we want them to be a bit shorter. Maybe it's going to be like a 6. And I think that looks like a pretty good tick length relative to theirs. So I'm going to roll with that. So now let's think about our y-axis. And so the y-axis has a couple things going on that are kind of cool, right? And so first, well, they don't have anything for 0. That's fine. But their numbers sit on the grid lines. So they have grid lines, right? Well, we need to get there. And then also they put the legend next to the top value on that y-axis, right? So they say 60 declared flood disasters. What I've done in the past, and I think I'll do here, is basically get rid of my y-axis. I also need to get rid of my x-axis label, so we can do both at the same time. But we need to get rid of the y-axis. And then what I'll do is I will go ahead and basically change the x-axis limit to go out to the left, and I will add annotations at 20, 40, and 60. Okay, so let's go ahead and clean this up a little bit further. So we'll do axis.line.y equals element blank. And we'll also do the same thing for axis.tix.y equals element blank. So that got rid of that, but we need to get rid of the text also, right? So we'll do axis.text.y equals element blank. Got rid of that. Let's go ahead and get rid of those labels, which we can do back up here in labs. And we'll add that for x equals null, y equals null. And of course, then that got rid of those labels. Very cool. So now what I want to do is I want to extend this x-axis back in time, maybe like a year, right? Maybe with chord Cartesian, we could do xlim, and we could do from 1999 to 2024. And so that's going to be put in there as a vector. Basically, I'm adding a year before the data starts. And my data starts at the year 2000. So again, by starting at 1999, we're going to make that x-axis line go to the left just a smidge. And what I'm noticing is that I added that smidge, but I also took away a smidge from my last column, right? So I think what we'll do is modify this to go to, let's say 2024.5. And so now I've got the full bar, but we don't quite have enough on the left. So, and of course, because I put in 1999, we only have half of a bar, right? And so we could do 1998.5, and then that gives us a nice platform, if you will, to then put on the number of declared flood disasters. So let's go ahead and add on our grid lines. We'll do panel.grid.major.y equals element line, color equals light gray. Very good. I want these grid lines in the original appear to be about the same thickness as the x-axis line. So I want to do the same thing. And what I used in mine was a line width of 0.25. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this down here for the grid line. Now what we can do is go ahead and put these numbers that we see in the New York Times version on top of the grid lines. And so I'm going to go ahead and do that with the annotate function. So do annotate, geom is going to be text, and our x position, if you recall, we put the start of the x-axis at 1998.5. Let's put it at 1999. And then our y is going to be a series of values. So we're going to do 20, 40, and 60. And then labels, we'll do 20, 40, and 60. Of course, we're going to change that 60 here in a minute. And then we want to do hjust to be 0. So it's going to be left justified on that 1999 position. It's upset about my labels. I think what I wanted to put there was perhaps label. So let's go ahead and remove that S. Very good. That gets us the value. And it is perhaps too far to the right. So let's go ahead and left justify it. And we'll move it up. Let's move it up by one disaster. And so let's see. Let's put this at 1998.5. And then let's put this at 21, 41, and 61. Actually, you know what? Because I might be moving all three of these values multiple times to get it to be right, I'm going to add a value to the vector, right? So if I end up needing to move it by 2, all I'll have to do is change that 1 here to a 2. But I don't think I need to do that because I think I got it pretty right. Now we can change the label for our 60 to be the 60 declared flood disasters. And so we'll come back up here. And where did we have our 60 here? We'll go ahead and put that in quotes, and we'll add the declared flood disasters. I'll go ahead and put the 20 and 40 in quotes. And so now we have our 60 declared flood disasters, right? So it's looking a lot like what they had in the New York Times version. I'm noticing that their font on the Y and X axis text is, it's not black, but it's not the same light gray. So I think what I'll do is go ahead and make my axis text X a gray color. So we'll do axis.text.x element text color equals gray. And so let's go ahead and see what that looks like. And I think that's too light. So I'm going to go ahead in here then, and let's use one of the other grays. So if we do like gray 50, that's a little bit darker. 30 is darker still. 40, let's go with 40. And so I think that looks like a good color match to what they had in the New York Times version. Now let's do the annotation values. And so we'll go ahead and make color gray 40, copy that, and then bring that up here to the geom text. And we'll go ahead and paste that in. Now our y-axis text, or what we're creating as our y-axis text, is the same color as our x-axis text. They also have the same font size, and I'm going to try to match the font, but it appears that the y-axis font that I have is the same size as theirs. So that's good. I'm just not sure what size that is. And so I'm going to come back up to my geom text, and then let's in here do size equals 8, and we'll do size.unit equals pt. So it's going to be an 8-point font for that y-axis. So that got quite a bit smaller. Let's boost that up to 10. I think that looks pretty good. I think it might be 11 though. So let's take that up to size of 11, and I think that looks right. So now I'm going to make my axis text x size to be 11. So we'll do size equals 11 and axis text x. I don't need to say the size.unit down here because by default, the size down here is in the unit of points, whereas up with like geom text, it's not the same as points. So let's see what this looks like now. So I think that looks pretty good. This font, now that I look at it, looks a little bit bigger than what they have, but we'll worry about that here in a bit. One other thing that I notice is that our caption is right at the text, and that's likely because we removed the x-axis label. So let's go ahead and add in a margin that will match theirs. And I think I already have a plot caption here, right? And so then let's go ahead and do margin equals margin. And then this will be a top. Let's go ahead and put in 10 for the 10-point margin at the top. So that looks good. We're going to end up fiddling with that a little bit more because the last thing I'd like to do is go ahead and match their font. So the New York Times serif font is fairly iconic, and this is called a Cheltenham font. I'm probably mispronouncing that. But their sans serif font is a Franklin font. And so looking around in Google Fonts, I found a font that kind of looks like their serif font. So we see there's surge in US flood disasters, right? Like, so that's like a bold 700. It's not a perfect match, but it's pretty good. So the Libre Franklin is a free version of the Franklin font, which the Franklin font is what New York Times is using for their sans serif font. And so we're going to implement this using the show text package. We'll do library show text. So I've used show text in a previous episode where I was trying to replicate the appearance of a plot on wages in the state of Michigan. We'll do font add Google. So again, the two fonts that we want are Domine and that Libre Franklin. So in here, I'll put Domine, and then I'll put the name of the font family that I want it to be, and I'll make that lowercase Domine. And then we'll also do font add Google, and we'll do Libre Franklin, and I'll make this Franklin. Now what we need to do is show text auto, which will set up using these fonts in here. Then we need to do show text opts, and we'll do DPI equals 300. So that's the resolution of the figure that we're making. So ggsave by default uses 300 DPI. And so that's basically density per inch of pixels. So we'll go ahead and load that. And so now we can use Domine and Franklin down below. And so let's go ahead and make sure it works by setting our title, right? So we can do family equals Domine. Hey, what do you know? We got it, right? That's not like horribly bad, right? Their A has a little bit of a hat going off of it, whereas ours doesn't, but I think it's pretty good. It kind of gives like the same type of flair. I'm noticing that I have US food disasters. Why didn't someone say something? This would be horrible to have food disasters. It's probably even worse to have flood disasters. So let's fix that and put in the L, all right? And so now we have the flood disasters. And so something you notice with their font is that the L and the F are right next to each other. So it almost looks like an A, right? And so we have a little bit of space between R, F, and L. But like I said, who cares? Now let's think about bringing in that Libre Franklin. We're going to do that then with all of the text. And so I wonder if we can do text equals element text. We'll do family equals Franklin. And the reason I think I can do text is because this theme function is hierarchical, right? And so if I define text at the very top of the hierarchy, then everything that inherits from text should also be using Franklin. We'll see. And so I think that did what I wanted to do. The 2 that we typically see with ggplot has more of kind of a, more of a hump at the bottom of the 2. And it also has a 1 without that bottom platform for the 1 to sit on. So I'm pretty sure we got the Libre Franklin implemented. One place that we don't have it will be up here in the label. And so let's go back up to that. And so in geom rich text, we could add here family equals Franklin. So recall that when we're bringing in our own fonts, say from Google Fonts, we need to update the fonts in the theme, but also if we're using labels, we also need to update the font family for the label like we have here. Very good. And we now have all of the fonts implemented. Let's go ahead and make the font of our title a bit bigger to match the title of the New York Times version. Again, we can do that in plot title. We'll do size equals, let's try 14. And that's a little bit longer, but it seems like the same height, maybe even shorter in height than what they have. So let's not futz with it too much. Let's go ahead and make it 16 just to make it a little bit taller and more pronounced. So that looks pretty good. Again, it's longer, but it's about the same height as the New York Times's Cheltenham font. So I think that's pretty good. Now let's think about the size of the fonts on the y-axis. Those actually look pretty good. On the x-axis, the x-axis font actually seems a little bit bigger than what they had. I realized that I didn't update the font for the text, right? And so let's come in here and do family equals Franklin. So that's better. That's the actual font that they used on the y-axis. And I see that mine is pretty dead on. Mine's maybe a little bit bigger than theirs. I'm not going to mess with it, but it does appear that my x-axis font is a smidge bigger than theirs. And so I had that at 11. Let's go ahead and make it 10. And so I think that's okay. I'm not going to mess with that too much. Let's go ahead and increase the font size on the caption. I'm not sure what it is by default. Let's set it at 10. So I think that's pretty good. Our font is a bit darker than theirs. And so let's see, we have that in the caption. Let's go ahead and make it that gray 40, right? So I'm going to go ahead and copy this gray 40 and put that on the next line here. And I think that does a good job of matching what they had. Again, I don't have a perfect match of their font. Maybe mine is too big. I can't really help myself here. So let's take this down to 9 for the caption. Actually, that does a pretty good job of matching the flow, right? So like agency is on the second line and it's the second line here. Whatever, that's pretty good. Let's increase that margin then above our caption. And so the caption margin was 10. Let's up it to 20. It could maybe go up a little bit more from 20. Let's go up to 25. And that's like dead on. There's probably a bit of a margin underneath the title. So we could, of course, futz with that. So why not? So we'll do margin equals margin. And it's the bottom margin that we want to change there. And let's put that at 10. And we can go down a little bit further. Let's try 15 on that. And that's like bang on, right? So I'm pretty happy with that. I'm going to stop here. Of course, there's always things that we could do to play with this a little bit further. But I think I've done a pretty nice job of replicating the New York Times version of this plot. I like how they've done a subtle use of color using this kind of light blue, baby blue color with the contrasting blue. If it were me, I might want this to be even more contrasting. I like that they use blue because blue is a color that we often associate with water, right? And so I think that's pretty cool. I like that we're able to bring in the fonts from Google Fonts. Not a perfect match, but again, for using free fonts, I think we did okay. So let me know what you think of this visualization. How did the New York Times authors and data visualists, how did they do? Let me know what you think. What would you critique about how they generated this figure? Please make sure that you've subscribed to the channel, tell your friends about what we're doing here, and I'll see you next time for another episode of Code Club.